Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again with our inaugural episode for a new season of the Texas Hill Country Authors Podcast. And I'm absolutely thrilled to have back as my guest Paul McGrath. Paul, welcome back to the podcast.
So glad to be here again.
Paul, we're here to talk about your latest book, Left is Right, a sequel to the Pencraft Award winning novel Left. Before we get to the book itself, could you just remind our readers of your professional background before you became an award winning author?
I spent most of my career pushing pencils and pica poles around as a editor in the newspaper game. I worked in four different Texas newspapers in Conroe, Lockhart, Lubbock, but primarily for the Houston Chronicle. I spent 37 years working on the news copy desk there. And if one bout of poverty wasn't enough, I decided to do some teaching on the side. So I've taught some college courses at A&M and UH in Clear Lake.
So remind our listeners your connection to A&M.
I graduated in 1978. I've got my boots to prove it and my ring. Yeah, I'm one of those maroon-blooded Aggie types.
You work on the bat.
I sure did. I was a sports editor of the Bat for a while, and it was quite interesting to see a review of Left in the battalion. It's like coming full circle to some degree.
Well, that's very cool. So tell us what inspired you to continue Anton's story in Left is Right.
It started off as it was going to be one book, and then I just fell in love with the characters. And then there were some things that were going on in the news at the time. I'm inspired by news events quite a bit. And it's like, here's a chance for me to keep these characters going so that they're not just, I think I've already had a number of people say, I want to know what's going to happen with these characters, where you go from here. And so book one became book two became book three became book four. And I'm actually working on book five right now.
I just finished a book I was reading where a longtime character was killed off, and the author wrote about it. It was such a beloved character in the acknowledgments at the end, and basically said it was time to take the main character in a different direction. So I'm really intrigued by the life of a character and how you view the life of a character throughout your series, once again tempered with you're inspired by current events.
Yeah, Arthur Conan Doyle tried to kill off Sherlock Holmes, and he got so much grief for doing it that he had to bring him back. It's just one of your characters as an author or writer, your characters become part of you. And through it also gives you a chance to express some things and use a voice that you might not otherwise be able to use. And just current, I like to, I think I mentioned the first time I was on your show, my wife calls me a professional smartass, and there's just enough stuff going on in the news. I need to say something about that or write about that, or I can use that. So that's kept the characters going.
But there's also a connection between the titles of this book and your most recent book. So we've got Left and Left is Right. Let's explore that a little bit. What does that mean?
I tried when I came up with Left, and then I decided to continue. I wanted to have a binder, so quote unquote binder, and the word left became a binder term. There's so many phrases in the English language that use the term left. And obviously in book one, Anton, the space alien, gets left behind. But there's an obvious double meaning. And a lot of that is expressed through Ellie. I'm rather progressive, and I use Ellie to express a lot of so is my wife. And so Ellie expresses a lot of the viewpoints that my wife and I would have on the sofa. But yeah, so there's a layered meaning, a couple of meanings there. And I use the word left in going forward. Book three is a hard left. Book four is all that's left. And book five, still playing around with it, but left will be in that title as well.
How do you use the power of empathy for Anton both in his empathy towards humanity and perhaps humanity's empathy or lack of back towards him.
Oh, yeah. Empathy definitely is a motivating force. And not only, certainly for Anton and Left, and then in Left is Right, Anton and Ellie more or less become a team, and empathy is definitely a motivating and a guiding force with them. It starts off with their both of them being their friendship and kinship with Ezra Gator Hopkins, and that their feelings toward you still there?
We're
I
good.
disappeared for a second. Their feelings toward Ezra motivates a lot of what happens in the first book. And I don't want to give things away in book two, but there is some carryover, let's say, of the ghost. The ghost of Ezra is still persists, is still hanging around. And that does a lot, that lights the fuse to get them to go on the mission that they go upon. And my Xylodonians, my aliens, are very self aware. They know that there are risks involved, but their feelings of empathy and or conscience override that.
So let me shift to a tonal shift that I think you made in this book, and that's where you really balance satire with a maybe a bit of a darker tone. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, there's definitely a little bit darker tone in this book than in Left, and it's largely because of the antagonist that I use. About the time that I started on this book, or when I was considering it, it's like, okay, who's my bad guy going to be this time? And this was about the time that the January 6th pardons came out, and some of the folks who got pardoned were right wing militia folks. And you also had the Epstein case was blowing up. And so right wing militias, human trafficking. Yeah, these are not the feel good topics of the year. So yeah, there's a lot of dark undertones and overtones with those things. And if that wasn't enough to make it dark, I threw in a Texas Motor Gang just for some more giggles and whatever. But yeah, there are some really nasty bad guys in this one.
But there's also humor, and you use humor as a narrative tool. Could you maybe explore that a little bit?
I felt the pain of the darkness. I felt the darkness rising in this thing. So it's wow, what do I have to do to counter that? And the counterweight to me was adding some humor. And there's one thing that I've done in all of the books. I have a little wordplay with names. As in Left, one name was Roy McDonald, was taken from a couple of fast food restaurants. Radley Duvall, I unashamedly borrowed from To Kill a Mockingbird, is Boo Radley and Robert Duvall. And so sad for us to lose Robert Duvall. He was one of my favorite actors. In this book, Roy McDonald has become Michael Gort, which is an homage to The Day the Earth Stood Still. That character was played by Michael Rennie, so there's the Michael part. And the robot was named Gort, so his last name becomes Gort. So I like to have some fun with the names, and I'll do that going forward. I was a Dallas Cowboy fan, so a couple of my future Xylodonians will have a play off of certain Dallas Cowboy quarterback names. And I would do that the same thing with organization acronyms to have a little fun with that. And of course, one of my big humor tools that I used here is Chadwick Cartwright. And Chadwick wears a bow tie. He's just the goofball, perpetually looking for romance. And some of the stories, there's a barroom scene where he's telling everyone some things about his love life. That what the reader doesn't know is his little stories. Those were all based on stories that my coworkers gave me from time to time. So the encounter with the elephant trainer is a real story.
I'm going to challenge you to use one of two names of my favorite cowboy, Dandy Don or the Dandaroo.
I
Look
loved
into
it.
that.
Yes. Yeah, I used to sing in the huddle, number 17.
Let's turn now to some of your current pulp culture references, and I'm almost going to call them a cameo appearance in the book. Let me start with the Jon Hamm dream sequence. How did you dream that up? And then how did you incorporate it into the overall storyline?
I actually did. I did dream up most of that. I started when I wrote the first chapter of the book. It was actually before the November 2024 election. And my opening chapter was going to be a spoof campfire scene outside of Marfa, Texas. And I actually had a lot of fun writing that chapter. The election results made that the chapter didn't work. So I was like, what can I do? And I actually had a dream about Jon Hamm flying in a bicycle over me, a flying bicycle of some kind. The Jon Hamm was everywhere. He was in commercials. He was in like 3 or 4 different TV series, some comedy, some drama. He just blew up. And so I guess he was stuck in my head. And this was even before he got into Landman. Speaking of characters who get killed off, but and I don't know about you, but nearly quite a few people I've spoken to have had that dream about a college class that they forgot to go to, or there's that one college class that they needed to pass a test to get out of school. There was like PTSD from the college days. I know I've had that dream, and I wake up and I'm not even in college anymore. And so I combined that with Jon Hamm, and that's where that first chapter evolved from.
Did you have fun with it?
Oh yeah, yeah. I was just probably too much fun. Of course, I had to have a couple, and since he's a professor, and I have a couple of characters drinking Hamm's beer. I had to do that little play.
So how is all of this going to play out in the future in terms of, is this a transitional novel that will broaden out, or do you just go where the spirit moves you?
Yes, it is transitional in that now Anton and Ellie are working more as a team, and they are still, at this point, they are still running away from from the law enforcement agencies on 2 different planets. The FBI is still looking for them on Earth, and the Xyladonian folks are not real happy with them because of all the exposure the things that they did in the first book that it jeopardizes the Xyladonian mission on Earth. They actually, the Xyladonians send some folks to try to at least apprehend Anton. And by the end of the book, let's just say that they're back in the good graces with their supervisors on this alien planet. And so going forward, they will again be under that umbrella or following orders to some degree, or under the auspices of what the protectorate tells them to do.
So if the readers, other than buying the book, which I hope is the key takeaway from this podcast, what do you hope the readers take away from this book, Paul?
One thing I wanted to do is, well, I'm trying to do in each one of my books is present something, give some information that a lot of folks don't know about. And as I was researching, I came up with the bad guys of the right-wing militias and the human trafficking, and trying to make money from doing militias, trying to make money from doing that. As I was researching that, like I was finding I've been in the newspaper game for 5, 6 decades, and there were some things that I didn't realize. There was a militia gang out of Oklahoma that actually was robbing banks using disguises of presidential masks. And this became the inspiration for the movie Point Break, which is, of course, set in California, but it's a real story in the Midwest. And at about that same time, I found out that Houston, where I live, is the human trafficking capital of the world. What? And as I did more research, I tried to put that in the book. So I try to give him a little bit of education. I can't help but do my newspaper man bit, I guess, there. But I present the problem, the bad guys or whatever. And what I would like my characters to do is, okay, here's the problem. Let's just don't talk about it. Let's do something about it. And that's what Anton and Ellie do. It's whether motivated by empathy or whether they're motivated by conscience. As you find out, Ellie has a student who was she started worked as a teacher in Colorado before she moves to Mississippi, and one of her students gets abused, and so she's feeling that pain. So there's the motivation of empathy and conscience that gets them to want to tilt the dragon, tilt the windmill, as it were, or just face the risk to do something about some situation that a wrong that they feel. These are my characters on the left. They know right is right, so to speak, and they try to do right.
Paul Lee, could you say a few words about your continued work with and experience with Stony Creek Publishing?
Ah, I love those guys. Certainly, I was very lucky to have a relationship with Lauren Steffi, the CEO of Stony Creek. I had a relationship with him going back to the Houston Chronicle. And while I was still teaching at A&M, I would have him come in as a guest speaker to my class. That was that I was able to springboard off that. But Stony Creek has been great. There's certainly lots of things about the publishing game that I didn't know anything about. And Lauren there's a couple of folks there who do Leslie Barrett, who does a lot of the marketing, promoting, and Danielle Agee, who takes care of a lot of the digital stuff. And so they handle a lot of the things that frankly, I knew nothing about. And certainly I didn't know anything. They were the ones who enabled me to participate in certain competitions. And that's how the Pencraft Award came to be. I wouldn't have never have known about that. But yeah, these folks have been very supportive, and I wouldn't have a little gold sticker on my book if it wasn't for them.
So, if anyone wanted to reach out to you or connect with you, rather, what might be the best social media platforms that you would prefer?
I would say I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, and also Twitter, Blue Sky, Threads. I do those too, but primarily through Instagram and Facebook, I would say.
Paul, I wanted to thank you again for taking the time to visit with me. I can't wait
Absolutely.
for your next volume and see where you take us down the road.
We're going to go up against Russians and cryptocurrency, so be looking for that.
So you're telling me buckle up. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
It's going to get different.
All right.